Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Noscasi and I am representing Team 1 Law Enforcement. Today I will be discussing the ethics of criminal profiling using data-driven analysis. Beginning in the late 20th century, in an ongoing effort to best protect and serve the U.S. public, law enforcement departments across the country started to modernize their criminal profiling capabilities with the implementation of data-driven analytical tools. Improvements in data analytics have inspired proactive strategies for policing and criminal profiling. However, the same technology can pose a significant threat to civilian civil liberties and personal privacy in already over-policed communities. Through this presentation, we evaluate the impact of enlisting specific data-driven tools using the just intelligence principles and alternative ethical approaches. We explore the impact on society, including the potential constraints on civil liberties and public trust in law enforcement. Our points of analysis will focus on facial recognition technology, cell phone tracking, CCTV, and intelligence-led policing. Law enforcement agencies across the United States, the data-driven criminal profiling tool, facial recognition technology, provides substantive support for identifying criminals and establishing links to crimes committed in public spaces. In Florida, facial recognition has long been part of daily policing. The Sheriff's Office in Pinellas County began testing the practical application of facial recognition software over 2 decades ago and now serves as the de facto facial recognition service for the state. It enables access to more than 30 million images, including driver's licenses, mugshots, and juvenile booking photos. This type of software conducts automated searching of a facial image against a known collection or database of photos. The images can be stored indefinitely as future reference to match incriminated individuals to future crimes. It is important to evaluate the risks of this technology for singling out individuals for the purpose of matching criminal profiles to data-based imagery archives. In order to evaluate the ethical impact of facial recognition technology software during criminal investigations, we first turn to Immanuel Kant's deontological ethical theory. Kant's ethical theory is grounded in the belief that individuals must be respected as ends in themselves and never used as a means to an end. By adhering to moral considerations when attempting to identify the person responsible for a crime, law enforcement officers can be confident that they uphold the moral imperative to protect and serve the public, especially when they attempt to identify a person guilty of a crime via facial recognition imagery. We next turn to the just intelligence principles. To determine just cause, there must be a significant criminal act committed by a specific individual that justifies the action of scanning images for a match and storing those potential matches for future reference. In the case of facial recognition programs, if the intention is to match an image to testimonial or video footage of a crime already committed, then the right intentions are met. However, if the facial recognition programs are storing images of people in public in anticipation of a legal action, then the intentions are not met. At present, the authority is given to the state government in partnership with local police chiefs and city councilors. Proportionality establishes whether the possible harm of scanning for facial recognition on a large database is worth the risk of accused guilt to innocent individuals with similar facial characteristics. With regard to discrimination, there is a risk of illegitimate targeting due to the possibility that facial recognition could flag facial characteristics of innocent civilians and store their biometric information indefinitely in a database. For last resort, law enforcement must look to other means of identifying an individual prior so that facial recognition is only ever used as a last resort. The level of harm caused by facial recognition is at level 2 on Bellaby's ladder of escalation. This is because the use of intensive surveillance via facial recognition causes a greater violation of privacy than seen with CCTV camera use because it collects information that is both more personal and in greater quantity. Federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies utilize cell phone tracking to locate wanted suspects with an unknown location. Although law enforcement may be targeting a specific individual, the devices are able to collect unique international mobile subscriber identity numbers on any phone within the area. As technology has progressed, there are also devices that are able to obtain additional information off the person's phone, such as location history and past communications. The common good approach defines the common good as certain general conditions that are equally to everyone's advantage, and therefore all people and government should act in a way that is advantageous to all of society. If we subscribe to the belief that cell phone tracking does not negatively affect anyone unless they have been found guilty of a crime, then it is possible to reach the conclusion that cell phone tracking is an ethical practice. Using the just intelligence principles, for cell phone tracking to meet just cause, there will need to be a sufficient threat by the individual in society. Authority should only be given by a judge in which a warrant is issued to provide oversight for the use of tracking. Right intentions are that cell phone tracking is only to be used on dangerous individuals and not abused by law enforcement to track individuals not known to be guilty. Other methods should be attempted before cell phone tracking is used, such as visiting previously known residences or patrolling areas that the individual frequents, leaving cell phone tracking as a last resort. To meet proportionality, the benefit of using cell phone tracking should be considered against any harms that are caused. For discrimination, to the fullest extent possible, law enforcement should ensure that the individual they are attempting to locate is indeed the legitimate target in possession of the tracked cell phone. The use of cell phone tracking would fall on level 3 of the ladder of escalation due to the potential for invasion of individual privacies in public and in private. Additionally, the risk that indiscriminate cell phone tracking may spur widespread distrust between law enforcement and civilians signifies the importance of upholding ethical decision-making when applying such data-driven analytical tools. The use of closed-circuit television, CCTV, in law enforcement has provided an invaluable tool for enhancing the effectiveness of policing in densely populated urban environments. Algorithms and software programming enable CCTV systems to detect suspicious behaviors, including the placement of abandoned packages. They can also search for specific colors of a suspect's clothing or physical signifiers. However, invasion of privacy is an inherent factor of concern when imagery is collected on individuals without their consent. For this reason, violating one's privacy and autonomy should be prohibited without appropriate justification. Under the moral rights theory, the use of CCTV must be evaluated against the assertion that people have intrinsic moral value and 5 basic moral rights. These basic rights can be protected if law enforcement conduct focused surveillance of CCTV to identify criminals in connection with violent crimes in public spaces. Societal institutions have a moral duty to protect others from acts that threaten their lives and individual security. CCTV can either support or counteract this moral duty. A real-world example of CCTV in use is when the FBI and Boston Police Department utilized video coverage of the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, enabling them to identify suspects Dzhokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev. For the just intelligence principles, in order to utilize CCTV cameras, law enforcement must have sufficient just cause from a threat against society great enough to justify the harms caused by collecting video on the individuals in public. Proper authority is satisfied by city leadership sanctioning the use of cameras for purposes of criminal investigation. The right intentions are satisfied if CCTV is strictly used for identifying and tracking criminal activities and not for any other purpose. To satisfy last resort, law enforcement must ensure less harmful actions have been attempted prior to collecting imagery via CCTV. Proportionality is satisfied because harm associated with an individual's privacy in public spaces are outweighed by a reduction in crime rates. Lastly, discrimination between legitimate and illegitimate targets can be satisfied if law enforcement can separate innocent citizens from suspects in their video focused on criminal activities. The level of harm associated with CCTV ranks low on the ladder of escalation, starting at the initial level for unfocused monitoring of large groups and rising to level 1 as the focus shifts to identifying and following individuals. Led policing, ILP, has great potential for supporting law enforcement as it can serve as both an analytical or organizational tool. Methods encompassed in ILP can include problem-oriented policing, hotspot policing, and community-oriented policing. A few of the most well-known tools used in departments across the country are CompStat, Predpol, and Laser, all of which use predictive analytics and statistical data collection for improving strategies and deploying officers. Perhaps the greatest ethical threat is in the algorithmic bias and ability for large-scale surveillance techniques to perpetuate bias and increased over-policing of marginalized areas. The justice and fairness approach helps explain how predictive analysis affects perceptions and how someone will be treated before committing an actual crime. ILP offers a proactive response, which means police are sent to areas with the expectations that a crime will occur. An example of this is when officers were mandated to report a certain amount of crime via CompStat in the 1990s. It encouraged them to over-police in certain areas, and when they couldn't find the crime, they resorted to forging the numbers in CompStat. For the just intelligence principles, there are proper justifications in resorting to proactive measures in decreasing crime as it relates to just cause. Local or federal law enforcement has the authority to sanction ILP. They have the right intentions in reducing crime by utilizing ILP as it relates to bettering the community through no other agenda. There are other non-invasive measures to consider when reducing crime, so ILP is not the last resort. Education, prison reform, and increased community funding are some examples. When evaluating proportionality, the pros do not outweigh the consequences. Targeting individuals who are in areas and quote-unquote fit the description is not proper discrimination of legitimate versus illegitimate targets. Consequences of ILP can be analyzed through invasive surveillance via interruption of privacy and violations of bodily security. Because of these risks, ILP would most likely sit between level 1 or 2. This is because collection of data and police surveillance fall on level 1, but the potential risk of excessive force and brutality can fall on level 2. Each data-driven criminal profiling tool requires individual assessment and ethical consideration. By reflecting on the 4 points of analysis, we can see the overarching value in employing ethical approaches to law enforcement activities. The institution of common standards, policies, and practices will help expedite ethical profiling capabilities while at the same time protecting the privacy of citizens and preserving hard-won community policing relationships. By examining facial recognition technology in an ethical context, we have learned that there should be pragmatic consideration by law enforcement professionals to determine how biometric data and images remain within a database, who has access to it, and when it is used. The rise in commercial cell phone tracking capabilities by law enforcement agencies has resulted in a need for legislative and moral evaluation to best protect civilians against unethical surveillance practices. When CCTV is used in a manner that targets individuals based on racial, ethnic, religious, or other socially based signifiers, this report concludes that there is unethical justification for this form of data-driven analysis. Lastly, in our examination of intelligence-led policing, we identified the implicit bias programmed into these analytical tools and identified opportunities to improve upon the present bias which perpetuates a system of unethical policing of public spaces. In order to mitigate the ethical harm of these data-driven analytical tools, law enforcement should rely more heavily on community policing, unbiased algorithms, and fine-tuned surveillance technologies. This can help prevent future harm to the innocent and instill ethical best practices for law enforcement professionals. We look forward to reading your feedback in the comments. Thank you.